Hello and welcome back to our deep dive series on narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. And I'm going to share with you my markups from this Dover Thrift Edition. We are going to cover today chapters 8 and 9. They're two short chapters, shouldn't take us too long, and that'll set us up for the very long chapter and one of the most important chapters in the book, chapter 10, which will be devoted. The next episode is devoted entirely to chapter 10. But let's jump right to chapter 8 and 9. Where are we at in the story at this point? We've just covered the literacy chapter. So Frederick Douglass learned to read and write, largely self-taught. And now we have some plot points, some changes in the story. Never forget that this is a narrative, it's a story. And it has scenes, it has plot points, plot twists, it has crisis, climax, all the great elements of storytelling are here. And I would say we're coming on to like a rising action phase in this plot. So let's jump over to chapter 8, and we'll pick our spots pretty selectively here. Basically, we have Frederick Douglass was in Baltimore for about 5 years. And at that point, you had some deaths in the master's family. And it was necessary to value the property and divide it up. So this is the valuation and division of the slaves. So he is sent for. Frederick Douglass is sent for. He crosses the Chesapeake Bay over back to the eastern shore. And I think he spends about a month like at the old plantation area. And all of them were ranked together at the valuation. Now you have to think about how humiliating this would be. You're basically being lined up as a slave alongside the livestock. You're just being treated as cattle, as livestock. Line them all up, we'll evaluate every one, and then we'll divvy them up. Your fate is not in your hands when you're a slave. And after the valuation comes the division. And here he has a real dread of falling into the hands of Master Andrew, who was known as being a most cruel wretch, a common drunkard, who had by his reckless mismanagement and profligate dissipation already wasted a large portion of his father's property. Yeah, a real winner. And, there's examples of the cruelty of Master Andrew that are outlined here. But I want to point back to this motif in the book. Remember, in previous installments, we talked about the role that providence plays. And here it comes again. Thanks to a kind providence, I fell to the portion of Mrs. Lucretia and was sent immediately back to Baltimore to live again in the family of Master Hugh. Their joy at my return equaled their sorrow at my departure. It was a glad day to me. I had escaped a worse than lion's jaws. I was absent from Baltimore for the purpose of valuation and division just about 1 month, and it seemed to have been 6. Providence, hidden hands, fate. I don't know what you want to call it. He calls it providence. He had nothing to do with that. Wasn't his choice, but it's a lucky stroke for him. Things would have been a lot worse if he had been divvied up and sent to be working on the plantation. But then we have more plot twists. So Lucretia dies, and Master Andrew, that's this bloody cruel guy, he dies. And now all the property of my old master slaves included was in the hands of strangers. Not a slave was left free. All remained slaves from the youngest to the oldest. And then we're going to get to this depiction of his grandmother, one of the more uh, touching scenes in the story, a lot of pathos here. And he talks about the impact of this on him. If any one thing in my experience more than another served to deepen my conviction of the infernal character of slavery and to fill me with unutterable loathing of slaveholders, it was their base ingratitude to my poor old grandmother. This woman served faithfully her whole life and had been a slave all this time, slave in the hand of strangers. And now that she's old, she's literally being put out to pasture. They took her to the woods, built her a little hut, put up a little mud chimney, and they made her welcome to the privilege of supporting herself there in perfect loneliness, thus virtually turning her out to die. He quotes the poet Whittier here. This passage is very lyrical. It's very poetic. I want to share it. Like, listen to his oratory, listen to his phrasing and the poetry in these lines. It's very touching, emotional, moving. The hearth is desolate. The children, the unconscious children who once sang and danced in her presence, are gone. She gropes her way in the darkness of age for a drink of water. Instead of the voices of her children, she hears by day the moans of the dove, and by night the screams of the hideous owl. All is gloom. The grave is at the door. And now, when weighed down by the pains and aches of old age, when the head inclines to the feet, when the beginning and ending of human existence meet, and helpless infancy and painful old age combine together, at this time, this most needful time, the time for the exercise of that tenderness and affection which children only can exercise towards a declining parent. My poor old grandmother, the devoted mother of 12 children, is left all alone in yonder little hut before a few dim embers. She stands, she sits, she staggers, she falls, she groans, she dies, and there are none of her children or grandchildren present to wipe from her wrinkled brow the cold sweat of death, or to place beside the sod her fallen remains. Will not a righteous God visit for these things? So you get the emotion there, the loneliness. It's about the severing of family bonds that we've talked about before. And this poor old woman is left out to die, put out to pasture, and he can't do anything about it but feel for her. And it puts me in a mind of, more generally speaking, if you sort of branch away from just thinking of this about as a book about slavery, it's how I asked the question, how do we treat our elders? How do we treat our parents and grandparents as they age out? And how do we, not just as family members, but as a society? And do we put people out to pasture in other ways, not as literal as this? Do we shuffle them off and forget about them? Do we respect our elders? Do we feel for them? Do we see the dignity in their lives and so forth? Like, and this makes me think of, I think of programs like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, New Deal programs, Great Society programs that were meant to build a social safety net for people. And these are entitlement programs, and we are entitled to them. We deserve that, and it always pains me to see people complain about those programs. Can they be better run? Yeah, maybe. I mean, nothing's perfect, but imagine a world without Social Security. There used to be one, and it just makes me think that, what is important to us. We get a sense here of what's important to Frederick Douglass. But I digress. Let's move on. So after the death of Lucretia and Thomas, Master Thomas marries his second wife. Her name is Rowena Hamilton, and he lives in St. Michael's. And then another kind of fickle finger of fate twist happens, is there was some kind of an argument or misunderstanding between Master Hugh and Master Thomas. And he says, as a means of punishing his brother, he took me from him to live with himself at St. Michael's. So here, Douglass now has to leave Baltimore again. But this time he has a slightly different attitude about it, because he says, a great change had taken place in Master Hugh and his once kind and affectionate wife. We've seen the transformation of Mrs. Auld, remember? The influence of brandy upon him, so he's been drinking, and of slavery upon her, we've had that story told to us, had affected a disastrous change in the characters of both, so that as far as they were concerned, I thought I had little to lose by the change. But it was not to them that I was attached. It was to those little Baltimore boys that I felt the strongest attachment, the ones he learned to read and write from, and the ones who sympathized with him. Okay, so then he sails from Baltimore for the Eastern Shore, across the Chesapeake Bay, and he watches the steamboats heading north to go towards Philadelphia. And that registers with him. My determination to run away was again reviled. He just has to wait for his opportunity. Now is not the time. Now we go on to chapter 9, and he is able to now provide actual dates for things. So this was in March of 1832 that he went back to the Eastern Shore. And Master Thomas is profiled in this chapter. He is not the best master. He is mean and cruel, and he doesn't feed his slaves well. Like, this is the first time that Frederick Douglass is really feeling the gnawing pangs of hunger. And, there's just never enough to eat. They have to beg and steal just to get enough to eat. And he says here, some interesting character analysis here. Bad as all slaveholders are, we seldom meet one destitute of every element of character commanding respect. My master was one of this rare sort. He has no redeeming qualities at all. I do not know of one single noble act ever performed by him. The leading trait in his character was meanness. Imagine that being your... Well, I can think of some people that's their main character trait. And if there were any other element in his nature, it was made subject to this. He was mean. And like most other mean men, he lacked the ability to conceal his meanness. Well, that reminds me of some people I can think of who in a master leader role. Captain Auld was not born a slaveholder. He had been a poor man, master only of a baycraft. He came into possession of all his slaves by marriage, and of all men, adopted slaveholders are the worst. He was cruel, but cowardly. Bad combination. He commanded without firmness. He doesn't know how to lead. In the enforcement of his rules, he was at times rigid and at times lax. He's inconsistent. At times he spoke to his slave with the firmness of Napoleon and the fury of a demon. At other times he might well be mistaken for an inquirer who had lost his way. He did nothing of himself. He might have passed for a lion but for his ears. In all things noble which he attempted, his own meanness shone most conspicuous. His airs, words, and actions were the airs, words, and actions of born slaveholders, and being assumed were awkward enough. He was not even a good imitator. He's a fraud. He possessed all the disposition to deceive, but wanted the power. Having no resources within himself, he was compelled to be the copyist of many, and being such, he was forever the victim of inconsistency. And of consequence, he was an object of contempt. The slaves couldn't stand them. They didn't respect them. Couldn't manage the slaves. And this really bothers him. Our want of reverence for him must have perplexed him greatly. He wished to have us call him master, but lacked the firmness necessary to command us to do so. And then in August of 1832, Master went to a camp meeting, a Methodist camp meeting, and got religion. Now, there are in these chapters and continuing all through the rest of the book, a very savage attack on the hypocrisy of religion in America, religion that props up the slave-holding institution. So you're going to see examples of that. Let's write that down. Hypocrisy of religion. After his conversion, he found religious sanction and support for his slave-holding cruelty. If your religion is giving you cover for your slave-holding cruelty, your religion has problems. He made the greatest pretensions to piety. Oh, he's so pious. His house was the house of prayer. He prayed morning, noon, and night. He very soon distinguished himself among his brethren and was soon made a class leader and exhorter. His activity in revivals was great, and he proved himself an instrument in the hands of the church in converting many souls. And he brings these other preachers in, and they have different names and personalities. Slaves like some better than others. He says down here on page 33, while I lived with my master in St. Michael's, there was a white young man, a Mr. Wilson, who proposed to keep a Sabbath school for the instruction of slaves, such slaves as might be disposed to learn to read the New Testament. We met but 3 times. When Mr. West and Mr. Fairbanks, both class leaders with many others, came upon us with sticks and other missiles, drove us off, and forbade us to meet again. Thus ended our little Sabbath school in the pious town of St. Michael's. You're seeing a lot of irony here. These people pretend to be pious. If this was piety, if this is piety, I don't want anything to do with it. Here again, it's like a Sabbath school, like a Sunday school. Wouldn't you think you'd want the slaves to get religion too? No, that's not how the slave system worked. They didn't want the slaves to be educated. They just wanted the slaves to obey and respect the slaveholders. I have said my master found religious sanction for his cruelty. And then he gives an example of, whipping another young woman. Very graphic scene here. He would tie this woman up for 4 or 5 hours at a time. And here's the irony coming back at the bottom of the page. Here was a recently converted man holding on upon the mother and at the same time turning out her helpless child to starve and die. Master Thomas was one of the many pious slaveholders who hold slaves for the very charitable purpose of taking care of them. This is not piety. This is not charity. This is cruelty. This is unchecked power. And they used religion as cover for it. And there's conflict here, character conflict between Frederick and his master. Remember, Frederick has no respect for this guy. The master doesn't like Frederick because he had spent time as a city slave, and he feels like that had a pernicious effect on him. and made him unfit. And he gives an example of how Douglas would tend to like let the master's horse run away to the father-in-law's farm, which was about 5 miles away, and then Frederick would have to go fetch the horse back. But he only allowed this to happen so that he could get something to eat, because those slaves were much better fed at the other farm. But Master Thomas, just saw this as a flaw in Frederick's character that he kept, screwing up. Master Thomas at length said he would stand it no longer. Frederick had been with him 9 months, and he had whipped Frederick a lot of times, all to no good purpose. So what does he do? And this is a plot point because it sets us up for chapter 10. He rents Frederick Douglass to a man named Edward Covey, Covey. Mr. Covey was a poor man, a farm renter. He rented the place upon which he lived, as also the hands with which he tilled it. So he's in a different social class from Master Thomas. But he also has a reputation. He's a slave breaker. He can break young slaves. And so other slaveholders will let him rent their slaves for the purpose of breaking them. And then Mr. Covey gets the benefit of their labor. And by the way, Mr. Covey, he's real religious too. He's added to the natural good qualities of Mr. Covey. We should be putting scare quotes around these things. It's all irony. He was a professor of religion, a pious soul, a member and a class leader in the Methodist Church. Such a great guy. But his reputation is he can break slaves. And yet, even though Frederick Douglass knows about that reputation, he makes the change gladly because at least he's going to get enough to eat. Hunger is one of those base needs that we have. I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and food and water are like sort of at the bottom of the pyramid, aren't they? So this sets us up for chapter 10, where he's going to spend time with Mr. Covey. This is really the turning point of the narrative coming up. So it's a long chapter. If you're reading along, take your time with it. Do a lot of highlighting because there's important stuff. We're going to look at a lot of scenes in here that are really bear up to close scrutiny. And you'll see he tells you where the turning points are. And this is where we really learn a lot about, it's really like where Frederick Douglass starts to grow up, I think is the way I would put it, and mature. And he realizes there's different ways that you can fight this system that's overwhelming people and dominating them, and there's different ways you can resist. So anyway, that is a brief look at chapters 8 and 9. Next up on this series, chapter 10. Hope you follow the playlist and get caught up on old episodes if you missed the earlier chapters. We've only got 2 more episodes to go, so we're going to do chapter 10 next, and then for our last episode, chapter 11 and the appendix. Thanks for following along. Leave a comment if you have questions or thoughts. Bye-bye.